Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? I'd love to know. Share it in the comments along with how you liked the story. I reply to every single one of you. Now let's step into the mystery. In the heart of Istanbul, under the moonlit glow of the Bosphorus bridges, a mysterious death shakes the city. Jamal Yildiz is found lifeless, and whispers of secrets hidden beneath centuries-old tunnels hint at a deadly conspiracy. One keen-eyed detective, Miss Marple, arrives, an unassuming woman with a sharp mind and a relentless eye for detail. As she navigates secret passages, cryptic letters, and a web of lies within a powerful family, she uncovers betrayal, greed, and murder. Can she reveal the culprit before a second life is claimed? Istanbul holds its breath, and every shadow hides a clue. Chapter 1. Arrival in Istanbul. Miss Marple stepped off the train at Haydarpaşa station, the crisp autumn air of Istanbul brushing against her face. The city thrummed with life. The calls of street vendors mingled with the distant clang of ferry bells, and the Bosphorus shimmered under a copper-hued sun. For a moment, she allowed herself a rare pause, watching the elegant bridges stretch across the water like silver threads connecting two worlds. She had come at the invitation of Mr. Kemal Erdem, a wealthy art collector and a distant acquaintance, whose letters spoke of both hospitality and a hint of unease. Istanbul, Miss Marple knew, was a city of contrasts, opulence and poverty, history and modernity, beauty and shadow. She felt instinctively that her visit would offer more than sightseeing. The Erdem mansion rose majestically on the European side of the Bosphorus, a palatial structure that seemed to watch the river as carefully as she observed the city. She was greeted by Mr. Erdem himself, a tall man with a carefully groomed moustache, eyes sharp and calculating beneath the heavy brows. "Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly, "welcome to Istanbul. I hope you find my city as enchanting as you did my letters." The interior of the mansion was a gallery of history. Antique carpets from the Ottoman era, delicate porcelain vases, and paintings that seemed almost alive. Miss Marple's eyes, however, were drawn to subtler details. A small, nervous maid hovering at the periphery of the room, and a young man, Mr. Erdem's son, Murat, leaning against the doorway with an expression that spoke more of suspicion than welcome. Dinner that evening was served on a terrace overlooking the Bosphorus. Candles flickered across the polished mahogany table, casting shifting shadows on the faces of the guests. Mr. Erdem's daughter, Layla, spoke with effortless charm, though Miss Marple noticed the faint tremor in her hands when she poured the wine. The conversation was lively, yet beneath the pleasantries, Miss Marple sensed a tension that hummed like an undercurrent. Subtle glances, abrupt changes of subject, and a series of whispered exchanges between Mr. Erdem and his lawyer, Mr. Tuncer. After dinner, Miss Marple insisted on a short walk along the Galata Bridge. The night air was crisp, the city lights dancing on the water below. It was there, amidst the hum of the ferry engines and distant music from a waterside cafe, that she overheard a fragment of conversation that pricked her curiosity. "You promised. It can't happen again," a voice whispered, urgent and fearful. She turned, but the shadowy figure she sought had vanished into the night, leaving only the echo of hurried footsteps. Something was wrong, she realized, though what she could not yet place. Istanbul was a city of secrets, and Miss Marple, with her lifelong practice of reading human behavior, understood instinctively that these were not ordinary quarrels. Returning to the mansion, she could not shake the feeling that her arrival had stirred forces that had lain dormant for years. The city had already begun to whisper its mysteries to her, and she, in turn, would listen carefully. Somewhere in Istanbul, on its bridges, beneath its streets, or within the hearts of the Erdem family, trouble was waiting. Miss Marple went to bed that night with a quiet resolve. She was a visitor in this foreign city, yet she carried with her a mind trained to see what others overlooked, to notice the significance of a glance, a hesitation, a misplaced object. Tomorrow, she decided, would be the beginning of understanding the shadows that lurked along the Bosphorus, and perhaps uncovering a secret that someone would prefer remained buried. Chapter 2. The First Death. The sun had barely risen over the Bosphorus when the city of Istanbul seemed to hold its breath. Miss Marple, awakened by the soft chime of the Erdem mansion's antique clock, dressed quietly and descended to the terrace for breakfast. The usual hum of the city was subdued, a strange hush that seemed to press upon her senses. Something, she sensed immediately, was different. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Layla greeted her. Her voice unusually pale, the tremor in her hand from last night now more pronounced. Murat, leaning against the archway of the dining room, offered no greeting at all. His eyes were dark, shadowed with unease. Before breakfast could be served, the household received a knock at the door, followed by the hurried entrance of a messenger. His eyes darted nervously from face to face as he gasped out the words, "There's been an accident on the Ataturk Bridge. Cemal Yildiz, he's dead." A silence fell, sharp as broken glass. Cemal Yildiz, a prominent businessman with ties to the Erdem family and many others in Istanbul's financial circles, was rumoured to be involved in contentious dealings with Mr. Erdem. Miss Marple's mind, ever alert to human behaviour and circumstance, immediately registered the weight of this news. "An accident?" she asked, quietly, her voice calm but precise. "Are you certain?" The messenger shook his head. "That's what the police say, madam. They claim he slipped and fell. From the bridge, but—" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Some people saw him with someone shortly before. A quarrel, they said." Miss Marple noted every detail. The way the messenger fidgeted, the pause before he spoke of witnesses, the nervous glance toward Murat. There was, she realized, more to this story than met the eye. The Erdems were visibly shaken. Layla clutched her napkin with trembling fingers, while Mr. Erdem's stoic demeanour seemed almost a mask. Murat, on the other hand, appeared almost defiant, his jaw set, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the way his eyes flicked toward her, as though silently questioning whether she might uncover what he did not want revealed. After a hasty breakfast, Miss Marple requested that the household driver take her to the Ataturk Bridge. She had a feeling that the official reports, however convenient, would not withstand scrutiny. Istanbul's bridges, she reflected, were not merely architectural marvels. They were silent witnesses to human folly, crime, and betrayal. The bridge was cordoned off by the local police, and the scene was chaotic. Uniformed officers directed traffic, and a cluster of curious onlookers lingered along the sidewalks. The water below reflected the early morning light in jagged ripples, glinting like shards of silver. Near the center of the bridge, a small group of detectives examined the scene where Cemal Yildiz had fallen. His body had been removed, but the marks remained. A streak of blood on the iron railing, disturbed dust, and muddy footprints that led toward a side pathway. Miss Marple walked slowly, deliberately observing everything. The railing, she noted, bore a slight scuff, inconsistent with a mere accidental slip. The footprints were not uniform. One set appeared hurried, almost dragging, while another was light and tentative. Her trained eye caught something most would overlook, a faint smear of red on the edge of a manhole cover, almost invisible in the morning light. "Inspector Halim," she said politely, addressing the lead officer at the scene. "Do you mind if I ask a few questions?" The inspector, a tall man with greying temples, seemed initially taken aback. "Madam, this is a crime scene, very delicate, but I have heard of your reputation." "Very well, please proceed, but be careful." Miss Marple's questions were gentle, but probing. She asked about the last known whereabouts of Mr. Yildiz, who had seen him last, and whether anyone had witnessed an argument or altercation. She noticed immediately the inconsistencies in the accounts. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a man in a dark coat near the railing, while others insisted the businessman had been alone. One street vendor, a wiry man with sharp eyes, muttered nervously about a shadow that moved too fast for a man. The more she listened, the more Miss Marple realized that this was not a simple accident. Cemal Yildiz had been embroiled in several disputes, some financial, others personal, but all hinted at motives for someone to silence him permanently. She filed each detail away in her mind, as she always did, the whisper of wind, the angle of the footprints, the nervous glances of witnesses. Returning to the mansion, Miss Marple noticed Murat pacing near the fountain, muttering under his breath. Layla sat in the drawing room, pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of tea. "This city," she said softly, "it hides its dangers behind its beauty. Bridges, streets, even the water beneath seems to watch us." Miss Marple nodded. "You are correct, my dear. And it is the watchers, those who seem invisible, that often carry the greatest danger." As the day progressed, news of Cemal's death spread across Istanbul. The press painted a picture of a tragic accident, but Miss Marple was unconvinced. She spent the afternoon reviewing letters, ledgers, and notes left at the Erdem mansion. Among them, she found correspondence that hinted at a heated dispute between Cemal and Mr. Erdem over a lucrative land deal near the Bosphorus. One letter, in particular, was troubling. It warned of consequences should the disagreement escalate. By evening, Miss Marple took a solitary walk along the Bosphorus, her mind piecing together a puzzle no one else yet saw. She observed the ferries gliding beneath the bridges, the minarets casting long shadows over the city, and the myriad ways people moved through their lives, unaware of the secrets surrounding them. Her attention returned to the Ataturk Bridge. She imagined the sequence of events, replaying the accounts, the footprints, the subtle traces of struggle. Somewhere in those details lay the truth. That night, back in her room at the Erdem mansion, Miss Marple examined the small notebook she had brought. She recorded her observations, the inconsistencies in witness statements, the traces at the bridge, the letters pointing to hidden motives. She reflected on human behavior, noting how fear and greed could distort actions, even the simplest ones. Cemal Yildiz's death, she was certain, was no accident. The city outside was alive with lights and murmurs, but to Miss Marple, Istanbul seemed a tapestry of secrets. Each bridge, each street, each shadow could tell a story, if one knew how to look. And Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence and sharp intellect, knew exactly how to look. Before sleep claimed her, she made a mental note. The next step would be to understand the connections between the Erdem family, Cemal Yildiz, and the mysterious figures she had glimpsed in the streets. The night had already whispered its first warnings, and she, as always, would listen carefully. For in Istanbul, as in all places where human ambition and secrecy intertwined, the first death was rarely the last. Chapter 3. Secrets of the Erdem Mansion. The morning following Cemal Yıldız's untimely death dawned clear and sharp, yet the air within the Erdem Mansion remained heavy with tension. Miss Marple, a creature of habit and observation, rose early as usual, noting that even the sunlight seemed reluctant to penetrate the gilded windows of the drawing-room. Istanbul's bridges glimmered in the distance, a reminder that the city's grandeur could conceal peril as easily as it revealed beauty. Over breakfast, the household was subdued. Layla's usual vivacity was replaced with quiet nervousness, and Murat's sullen composure had hardened into something sharper, almost defensive. Mr. Erdem himself maintained a calm exterior, but Miss Marple, trained to read subtleties in human behavior, saw the twitch of a finger, the brief furrow of a brow, small betrayals of inner turmoil. "Miss Marple," he said carefully after a pause, "I trust you are comfortable. I must confess, Cemal's death has left the family unsettled." "I can imagine, Mr. Erdem," she replied softly, her eyes lingering on the eldest son, "though sometimes unsettling events reveal what has long been hidden." Layla gave a nervous laugh, stirring her tea in circles that never seemed to end. "I think Istanbul itself hides many secrets," she murmured. "The bridges, the streets, even our own home feels watched." Miss Marple inclined her head slightly, making no immediate comment. Observation first, questions later, that had always been her method. After breakfast, Miss Marple requested permission to explore the mansion. She wandered deliberately, examining every room, every detail, aware that in large houses with long histories, the walls themselves sometimes spoke. In the library, she noticed books that had been deliberately misplaced, gaps on shelves that suggested hurried removal, and letters protruding from drawers in a way that seemed almost intentional. It was in one such drawer that she discovered a small hidden compartment. Within it lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Their contents were intriguing, hinting at blackmail, betrayal, and clandestine dealings. One letter, written in careful, precise handwriting, threatened exposure of a scandal should certain matters not be kept secret. The phrase "bridge rendezvous" caught her attention immediately. She filed it away in her mind, noting that it must refer not to the city's architecture alone, but to an event with consequences far graver than mere social embarrassment. Miss Marple's musings were interrupted by the sound of voices downstairs. She descended quietly and found Murat pacing the hall, his movements restless and abrupt. The young man's eyes darted repeatedly to the door, as though expecting someone or dreading an arrival. "Pacing seems futile," Miss Marple remarked quietly, approaching him. "One can tire the legs without tiring the mind." Murat's jaw tightened. "I find that some thoughts are more easily chased than faced," he replied curtly. "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed, noting the shift in his posture as he tried to mask anxiety with irritation. She had learned long ago that those who least wanted to be scrutinized often betrayed more than they intended. The day passed in a haze of whispered consultations and quiet observations. Miss Marple met the household staff individually, taking note of peculiarities in their behavior. The maid, who had seemed nervous from the first evening, now avoided her gaze entirely, while the cook spoke in hushed tones of a mysterious visitor seen near the garden gate late at night. None volunteered information willingly, but small slips, the mention of a visitor, a misplaced key, an unfamiliar shadow, accumulated like pieces of a puzzle. Late that afternoon, Miss Marple requested to speak with Mr. Erdem privately. They sat in his study, a room dominated by portraits of stern ancestors, and a large mahogany desk cluttered with papers and ledgers. "Mr. Erdem," she began gently, "your family is admirable, but wealth and prominence often attract attention of a less desirable kind. Is there something you have not disclosed about Mr. Yildiz?" He hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. Cemal was persistent. He believed certain lands near the Bosphorus were rightfully his. He was prepared to fight for them, regardless of our objections. "And was there anyone else involved?" Miss Marple asked, her voice even, patient. Mr. Erdem's eyes flicked to a painting on the wall, a stern-faced ancestor whose gaze seemed almost accusing. "Yes, there were others, associates, family friends, individuals who might stand to gain from his absence." He sighed deeply, a rare crack in his composed exterior. "I did not expect this outcome." Miss Marple noted the emphasis on the word outcome. It suggested knowledge of potential risk, though not necessarily intent. The detective filed this carefully. That evening, a brief storm passed over Istanbul, rattling windows and sending leaves swirling across the mansion's terraces. Miss Marple sat near the fireplace, examining the letters she had found earlier. Among them was one particularly disturbing. It detailed the theft of a priceless artifact, mentioning names she recognized. Names connected to both Cemal Yildiz and the Erdem family. The language was precise and deliberate, hinting at threats of exposure if anyone attempted to intervene. Layla entered quietly, her expression hesitant. "Miss Marple, you are not frightened by all of this?" she asked softly. "Fear is seldom helpful," Miss Marple replied. "Observation and patience, those are far more useful. And when people act out of fear, they often reveal more than they intend." Layla nodded, but her hands trembled. "It is difficult to know who to trust, even within our own home." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "That, my dear, is often the heart of a mystery. Those closest to us are sometimes the hardest to read." As night fell, Miss Marple retired to her room, but sleep was elusive. The mansion's halls, once merely grand, now seemed to hum with concealed tension. She recalled small details from the day: Murat's pacing, the maid's evasive glances, the mysterious letters, and the subtle scuff marks on the Ataturk Bridge. Istanbul's bridges, she reflected, were more than mere thoroughfares. They were stages upon which human ambition, greed, and fear played out. Unable to resist, she spent hours mapping the connections she perceived. Cemal's disputes, the Erdem family's internal tensions, and the potential presence of outside influences. Each clue, each slip of behavior, was a thread, and Miss Marple, as always, was prepared to follow it to its origin. Late into the night, a quiet knock at her door startled her. Standing in the doorway was the maid, her eyes wide with fear. "Miss Marple, I think someone was in the study this evening, after you left." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Did you see who it was?" "No, only shadows, and a hand moving through the drawers." "Thank you," Miss Marple said calmly. She closed the door and sat back, letting her mind piece together the implications. Someone had entered the study, possibly searching for the letters or for other incriminating evidence. The mystery was deepening, and she realized with a quiet thrill that Cemal Yildiz's death was only the beginning. The night air was heavy with the scent of rain and the distant perfume of gardens. Miss Marple, ever patient, listened not to the storm outside, but to the subtle murmurs of the house itself, the creaking floorboards, the whisper of curtains, and the nearly imperceptible tension that had settled over the Erdem mansion. Every detail mattered, she reminded herself. Every small action, every shadow could lead to the truth. And in Istanbul, a city of bridges and secrets, Miss Marple knew that the next revelation was only a step away. The first death had unearthed hidden motives, and the walls of the Erdem mansion concealed even more. Soon, she was certain, the threads would unravel, and the real danger would emerge. Chapter 4. The Istanbul Underground. The morning air in Istanbul carried a damp chill that seemed to seep into Miss Marple's bones as she made her way through the narrow streets toward the old quarter. The city, a tapestry of history and commerce, pulsed with life. Vendors shouting their wares, the distant tolling of mosque bells, and the faint hum of ferry engines drifting across the Bosphorus. But Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. Her mind was occupied with the letters, the scuff marks on the Ataturk bridge, and the whispered threats that Layla had conveyed the previous evening. Something in those shadows, she felt, pointed to an unseen network beneath the city, one that might explain Shamal Yıldız's death. Her inquiry had led her to a small cafe near the Golden Horn, where a wiry old man, known to locals as a purveyor of secrets, had agreed to meet her. He introduced himself as Kemal Bey, and, after careful observation of his surroundings, whispered the words she had expected. "There are tunnels beneath Istanbul, madam. Not for tourists, not for commerce, but for those who wish to meet unseen, move unseen, and take what is not theirs without observation." Miss Marple's mind, always attentive to human motives, registered the significance. These tunnels were not merely historical relics. They were conduits for clandestine dealings. "And these tunnels, who controls them?" she asked softly. "No one fully," Kemal Bey replied. "Some smugglers, some merchants, even certain influential families. But there are rules, and a violation brings swift punishment." Miss Marple nodded, her resolve firming. "I must see them." Kemal Bey studied her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Very well, but you must be cautious. Those who move unseen often prefer to remain so." By mid-afternoon, guided by Kemal Bey and a shadowed lantern, Miss Marple descended into the labyrinthine underbelly of Istanbul. The air was cool, damp, and tinged with the smell of earth and water. She noted every detail. The careful arrangement of stones, the faint graffiti indicating routes and directions, and the subtle traces of human passage. Scuff marks, footprints, and scraps of paper discarded carelessly but tellingly. It was here, in the quiet murk beneath the city, that Miss Marple saw evidence of recent activity. A torn piece of fabric caught on a nail. A scarf, she decided, possibly matching one worn by a visitor at the Erdem mansion. Nearby, a shallow groove in the floor suggested a hastily moved crate or container, and the faint smell of Turkish rose oil, almost imperceptible, lingered in the air. All of these small details, she understood, were part of a narrative that no one above ground suspected. Her progress was interrupted by the sound of hushed voices echoing through the tunnels. She crouched in the shadows, straining to hear. "Must be done tonight," said one voice, harsh and impatient. "I saw her, Miss Marple," another replied, cautious and low. "She is snooping. We cannot leave anything to chance." Miss Marple's mind raced. Evidently, someone knew of her investigation, and they were acting to protect their secrets. Yet she remained calm, observing the echoes and noting the direction from which the voices came. Following a side passage, she discovered a small chamber illuminated faintly by an oil lamp. Crates of fine silks and ceramics were stacked haphazardly, and in the corner, a masked figure meticulously inspected the contents of one crate. The person paused, looked directly at the entrance from which Miss Marple had been observing, and then quickly returned to their work. A note was tucked into one of the crates, written in precise, elegant handwriting, the same style she had noticed in the letters hidden in the Erdem mansion. Miss Marple noted carefully. The handwriting was deliberate and careful, suggesting education and refinement. The content hinted at clandestine transport of goods, possibly related to the stolen artwork mentioned in the hidden letters. This connection strengthened her suspicion that Cemal Yıldız's death was intertwined with a long-running scheme, likely involving those with both motive and access to the tunnels. A sudden clatter startled her. Miss Marple turned to see another figure emerge from a side passage, holding a lantern. Its bearer froze, startled to find her in the tunnel. Miss Marple, ever composed, inclined her head politely. "You should not be here," said the figure, voice low but firm. "It is dangerous for outsiders." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed, "but sometimes danger reveals more than safety ever could." The figure hesitated, as though debating whether to leave or confront her. Then, with a brief nod, they disappeared into the shadows, leaving Miss Marple to consider the significance of their presence. Whoever had been in the tunnels was organized, aware of potential threats, and careful to conceal their operations. Yet, as always, small oversights betrayed them. A piece of torn fabric, the scent of rose oil, and a hastily scribbled note. Miss Marple spent hours tracing the passages, careful to remain unseen. She discovered a network that stretched beneath the old city, connecting merchant houses, private docks, and even some historical bridges. It became clear to her that the tunnels had been repurposed over generations, evolving from secret trade routes into conduits for smuggling, blackmail, and other illicit dealings. Her investigation revealed another startling detail. A map, crudely drawn on the wall in charcoal, marked the Ataturk Bridge prominently, along with several locations she recognized from the city above. Miss Marple realized that these were points of rendezvous, possibly tied to Cemal Yıldız's final hours. Someone had used the bridge not merely as a site for observation, but as a stage for orchestrating his death, or at least controlling the circumstances surrounding it. Returning to the surface as night fell, Miss Marple paused to look at the city from the top of a quiet hill. The lights reflected in the Bosphorus, the bridges arching like silver threads across the water, and she thought about human nature and the intertwining of ambition, greed, and fear. Istanbul was a city of grandeur and danger, of beauty masking peril, and she felt the weight of the secrets she had glimpsed. Back at the Erdem mansion, Miss Marple shared carefully selected observations with Layla, without alarming her. "The city holds more than meets the eye, my dear," she said gently. "Sometimes the smallest details, the torn scarf, the misplaced crate, tell the story that everyone else misses." Layla shivered. "Do you think Cemal's death is connected to what you saw?" Miss Marple nodded slowly. "It would appear so. The tunnels, the notes, the patterns of movement, they suggest planning, purpose, and someone very determined to hide the truth." She retired early that night, but sleep did not come easily. Istanbul's underground passages seemed to echo in her mind. The hidden movements, the masked figures, the signs of secret alliances. She reviewed every observation, every slip of behavior, every subtle trace left behind, knowing that these pieces, when assembled, would reveal the identity of those responsible. As the city slept, Miss Marple considered the future. Kemal Yıldız's death was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a far more complex web. Somewhere in the labyrinth of tunnels and bridges, someone was orchestrating events with skill and precision. But Miss Marple, ever patient, knew that even the most careful plans left traces she would follow relentlessly. In her mind, she traced the connections, the Erdem family, the letters, the stolen artifacts, and the hidden network beneath the city. Each clue was a thread in a larger tapestry, and Miss Marple, like a skilled weaver, was beginning to see the pattern emerge. She understood, with quiet certainty, that the next revelation would bring danger, but also clarity. Istanbul's bridges and tunnels had spoken to her that day, whispering their secrets to a mind keen enough to hear them. And Miss Marple, with her gentle but unyielding persistence, was listening carefully, knowing that every shadow, every murmur, and every overlooked detail would lead her closer to the truth. Chapter 5. A Second Victim. The following morning brought with it a sense of unease that could not be dispelled by the brilliance of Istanbul's sun glinting off the Bosphorus. Miss Marple, ever sensitive to the subtleties of human behaviour, felt it immediately as she descended the grand staircase of the Erdem mansion. The household was quieter than usual. The servants moved like shadows, their faces tight with anxiety. Even the usually composed Mr. Erdem seemed less steady, his eyes darting to the windows as if expecting trouble to arrive at any moment. It was Murat, however, who displayed the most noticeable tension. He paced the hall with a rigidity that suggested anticipation, each footstep echoing in the marble corridors. His brotherly composure had vanished, replaced by a restless, almost predatory energy. Miss Marple observed him from a distance, her mind cataloguing every twitch, every glance, every hesitation. Human behaviour, she reflected, rarely concealed intent entirely. The calm was shattered by a frantic knocking at the front door. A young messenger, his face pale and streaked with sweat, burst into the room, waving a futile note in his hand. "Madam, sir, it's Murat Erdem. He's been attacked. Near the Bosphorus, on the walkway beneath the Ataturk Bridge." A hush fell over the room, punctuated only by the soft click of the grandfather clock. Layla let out a small trembling gasp, clutching at her chest. Mr. Erdem's hand tightened on the edge of the table, and even the servants froze, caught between curiosity and fear. Miss Marple, however, remained composed. "Lead the way," she said quietly, slipping into a coat. Her mind, ever methodical, began to assemble the pieces even before she had seen the scene. The tunnels, the hidden letters, Kemal Yıldız's death, and now an attack on the young Erdem son. The walkway beneath the bridge was shrouded in a thin morning mist, the Bosphorus below reflecting light like fractured glass. Murat was lying on the stone path, conscious but bruised, his coat damp and streaked with mud. He had been pushed, or perhaps had fallen, in a struggle. A crumpled letter lay near his hand, its edges soaked and smudged. Miss Marple knelt beside him, her eyes scanning the scene with meticulous care. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked gently. Murat's jaw was set, his voice strained. I didn't see clearly. Someone came from the shadows, tried to silence me. I fought. I think they were after something I know." She noted the handprints on his coat, the scrape marks along the stone, and the faint scent of Turkish rose oil that lingered in the air. A scent she had noticed before in the underground tunnels. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone was orchestrating a series of threats and attacks, using fear as a weapon. Nearby, a policeman was examining the scene, but Miss Marple observed how he overlooked the smaller details. the faint, hurried footprints leading toward a side passage, a smear of blood barely visible on the corner of a railing, and a torn piece of fabric caught on the ironwork. Each of these small traces, she realized, held significance, revealing both the root of the assailant and their carelessness. "Inspector Halim," she said politely, addressing the officer, "have you considered the possibility that this is not a random attack?" The inspector, a man of experience, but perhaps not of subtlety, shook his head. "Madam, it appears to be an accident, or at most, an attempted mugging." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm inclined to disagree. Observe the evidence closely. This is not the work of opportunists, but of someone who knows the victim well, who understands how to manipulate circumstance, and who wishes to remain unseen. Accidents rarely leave traces like these." Murat, still catching his breath, struggled to explain. "It's connected, I think, to my father's dealings, and to Shemal Yildiz, his death. It's all tangled together." Miss Marple's mind traced the connections carefully. Shemal's death had been the first move, a deliberate act designed to silence and intimidate. Murat's attack, though less severe, was a clear escalation. Someone was orchestrating events with precision, likely to prevent the Erdem family from uncovering truths best left hidden. Returning to the mansion, Miss Marple requested the family gather in the drawing room. She needed to observe their reactions, subtle as they might be, and to assess who might be hiding knowledge or motive. Layla was pale, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Mr. Erdem maintained a calm exterior, but his eyes betrayed concern that bordered on fear. Murat, though bruised and shaken, had regained his composure and sat rigidly, eyes scanning each face in the room. "I must speak plainly," Miss Marple began, her voice measured, drawing attention without accusation. "These events, the death of Mr. Yildiz, your son's attack, are not random. There is a pattern, deliberate and well-considered. Someone wishes to conceal a secret, and they are willing to harm anyone who comes too close." Her words drew murmurs of concern from the household staff, some of whom glanced toward one another as though afraid of revealing knowledge. Miss Marple continued, speaking in a tone that was both gentle and precise. "Secrets, when buried too deeply, often fester. They influence actions, shape behavior, and sometimes drive people to violence. The key is to observe, to notice the small discrepancies, the gestures, the pauses, the things left unsaid. It is in these details that truth hides." She turned her attention to Murat. "You mentioned your father's dealings. Were there disagreements recently that might have led someone to this extreme?" Murat hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, with Kemal. But also, there are others, family friends, associates who would lose much if certain truths came to light. I cannot name them. Not yet." Miss Marple noted the hesitation, filing it carefully. Every moment of reluctance, every carefully chosen word was part of the narrative she was constructing. As the evening wore on, Miss Marple took a solitary walk along the Bosphorus, letting her thoughts organize themselves. The city, beautiful and eternal, was layered with intrigue. Each bridge, each shadow, each winding alleyway held a clue. She thought of the tunnels she had explored the day before, the torn fabric, the faint scent of rose oil, the meticulously drawn map. Everything pointed to a network of secrecy that extended both above and below ground, intertwining personal vendettas with greed and ambition. Returning to the mansion, she retired to her room with the letters she had previously discovered. She compared the handwriting, noting stylistic consistencies and subtle differences, considering who might have access to such documents and why. Her mind moved seamlessly from motive to opportunity to method, the three pillars of human intrigue she had relied upon for decades. As she drifted towards sleep, her thoughts returned once more to the second attack. Whoever had assaulted Murat was skilled, but they had left traces. They had underestimated Miss Marple's attention to detail. And she knew their overconfidence would be their undoing. Istanbul's night settled over the city like a velvet cloak, the bridges glimmering under the moonlight, silent witnesses to ambition, betrayal, and the beginnings of justice. Miss Marple, with her quiet determination, felt that the threads of the mystery were converging. Each action, each small clue, was a step closer to uncovering the person or persons responsible for the escalating danger. And one truth, she reflected as sleep finally claimed her, was becoming clear. The first death was merely the opening act. The real drama had yet to unfold, and the city of Istanbul, with its labyrinthine streets, towering bridges, and secret tunnels, would provide both stage and audience. Chapter 6. Miss Marple's Revelation. The Erdem mansion had never felt so tense. Days of quiet investigation, subtle observations, and careful questioning had led Miss Marple to a point she rarely reached without certainty. She knew the truth lay not just in the overt actions of those around her, but in the shadows between gestures, in words left unsaid, and in the smallest details that most overlooked. That evening she requested that the family, the household staff, and the few trusted visitors gather in the drawing room. The room, usually a place of comfort and refinement, now seemed charged with electricity. Candles flickered along the mantelpiece, casting elongated shadows across the walls adorned with centuries of portraits. Even the paintings seemed to watch the unfolding drama. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice calm yet commanding. "We are gathered not to accuse, but to understand. The events of the past week, the death of Mr. Kemal Yildiz, the attack on Murat Erdem, are not random. They are deliberate, and they stem from a secret that someone in this room has worked tirelessly to protect." Layla clutched her hands together, eyes wide. Murat's posture was rigid, his expression guarded. Mr. Erdem's composure remained, but Miss Marple noted the quick flicker of unease in his gaze. Even the staff, silent and attentive, shifted subtly in their places. Miss Marple paused, letting her words sink in. Secrets, when buried deeply, can inspire fear and desperation. They influence behavior in ways both overt and subtle. It is often in what is left unspoken, in the glances exchanged and the actions seemingly insignificant, that the truth hides. She directed her attention toward a small set of letters she had laid on the table. These documents reveal the existence of a long-concealed plan. Artworks, letters, and arrangements meant to secure wealth and influence. They also reveal threats, blackmail, and the manipulation of events that have now escalated to murder. A low murmur ran through the group, but Miss Marple raised her hand for silence. "I have pieced together the movements, the actions, and the motives here. I have observed behavior, analyzed handwriting, and followed the subtle clues that led from the Ataturk Bridge to the underground passages beneath Istanbul. Each action has a purpose, each hesitation a story, and it all points to one individual, the person whose desire to protect the secret has overridden morality and law." She moved toward Mr. Tuncer, the family lawyer, whose hands had been trembling subtly throughout the evening. "You, Mr. Tuncer," she said, voice soft but resolute, "have been the silent orchestrator. You feared exposure, fear that a secret from decades past would come to light. You arranged the death of Kemal Yildiz and attempted to intimidate Murat into silence. Your meticulous planning was nearly flawless, but even the most careful schemers leave traces." Gasps echoed through the room. Layla stepped forward, incredulous. "Tuncer, our trusted lawyer. But why?" Miss Marple explained patiently, her words precise. Cemal Yildiz had discovered inconsistencies in the documents he shared with Mr. Erdem regarding the disputed properties. He threatened to expose the fraudulent transfers, knowing it would implicate certain individuals who wished to maintain appearances and wealth. You, Mr. Tuncer, fearing that your involvement and knowledge of these dealings would become public, took measures to protect yourself, first by eliminating Cemal, and then by attempting to silence Murat when he began asking questions. Tuncer's composure faltered. I did what I had to do, to protect the family's interests," he stammered, his face pale, beads of sweat forming along his temples. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Protecting a family is one thing, resorting to violence and deception is another. You overestimated your ability to control events, and underestimated the small signs that an observer could notice. The smear of rose oil, the misaligned footprints, the torn fabric in the tunnels. All of these were your undoing. She continued, drawing attention to the specific details that had led to her conclusion. The letter left near Murat's assault site, the movements in the underground passages, the patterns of behavior in the household, all were carefully arranged to mislead. Yet they were not perfect. Human habits, even subconscious ones, betray intent. The careful, deliberate handwriting in the hidden letters matches your style. The timing of movements, the calculated moments of threat, all point unmistakably toward you. Layla, still trembling, asked softly, "But the tunnels? The masked figures? Surely they were someone else." Miss Marple shook her head. They were part of the orchestrated plan. Disguises and shadows were used to create confusion, to suggest multiple actors. But the true influence, the mind behind the scenes, was yours. Fear drives cleverness, but even cleverness cannot erase the smallest trace of intent. Murat, finally breaking his silence, spoke with a mix of anger and relief. So it was him all along. The man we trusted, the man who managed our father's affairs, and we never suspected. Precisely, Miss Marple said. Trust is a powerful tool, and when misused, it becomes a weapon. Your father, Mr. Erdem, was not at fault. His dealings were legitimate, though complicated. It is the manipulation by someone trusted that turned matters into tragedy. Mr. Erdem, who had remained stoic until now, spoke for the first time. I cannot believe it. Tuncer, why? Why betray those you were supposed to protect? Tuncer's voice was almost a whisper. I was preserving what was necessary. I never meant for it to go this far. It was supposed to be controlled, contained, a warning, nothing more. Miss Marple's gaze was steady. The human mind often underestimates the consequences of actions driven by fear. You intended warning, but the result was death, terror, and risk to everyone you sought to shield. Justice, however, is impartial to intention when actions result in harm. At that moment, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Inspector Halim and his officers. Madam, the inspector said, bowing respectfully, we were summoned to apprehend Mr. Tuncer. Tuncer, now fully aware that his schemes were unravelling, made no attempt to flee. His pride had been shattered by exposure, and his composure crumbled. The officers led him away, his face pale and defeated. Miss Marple turned back to the family, her voice gentle. The danger is past for now. Yet it is a lesson in observation, in attention to detail, and in the way fear and secrecy can twist human behaviour into actions far beyond what anyone anticipated. Layla exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering fear in her eyes. "It is astonishing how you saw it all, Miss Marple." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "It is less astonishing than it seems. One must simply notice what others overlook, question what others accept, and never underestimate the influence of small details. A shadow in a corridor, a misaligned footprint, a slip of the hand, all these whisper truths if one listens carefully." The room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of revelation settling upon them. Outside, Istanbul shimmered under the evening sky, its bridges reflecting moonlight and the undisturbed flow of the Bosphorus below. The city had borne witness to crime, deception, and discovery. And now, with the mystery unveiled, it returned to its eternal rhythm. Miss Marple reflected quietly, considering the delicate balance of human behavior, ambition, and morality. Secrets, she knew, had a way of asserting themselves, whether through subtle actions, violent outbursts, or unforeseen consequences. And in a city as complex as Istanbul, with its bridges connecting continents and histories, the human heart remained as intricate and enigmatic as the paths beneath its streets. As she retired for the night, Miss Marple felt a rare sense of completion. Justice, in its quiet and deliberate manner, had been served. The threads of deceit had been untangled, and those who had relied on cunning and secrecy had been revealed. Yet she also knew that human nature would continue to challenge observation, patience, and insight, and that mysteries, like the city itself, were never truly finished. Chapter 7. Justice on the Bosphorus. The dawn over Istanbul was painted in pale gold and soft lavender, the Bosphorus shimmering like liquid silver beneath the awakening sun. From the terrace of the Erdem mansion, Miss Marple gazed out across the water, the bridges arching gracefully, silent witnesses to the city's centuries of history, commerce, and intrigue. Yet today, those same bridges symbolized something more: closure, resolution, and the triumph of observation over secrecy. The morning began with the quiet arrival of Inspector Halim and several officers. Mr. Tuncer had been taken to the police headquarters during the night, and Miss Marple accompanied the Erdem family to the station, her calm demeanour offering a subtle reassurance amid their lingering anxiety. Murat walked beside her, his bruises faint, but his mind still restless, while Layla clung gently to her father's arm. At the station, the interrogation room was stark, illuminated by a single overhead light that accentuated the severity of the morning. Mr. Tuncer sat at the table, hands folded in a vain attempt at composure. His face, pale and drawn, bore the weight of exposure, and the knowledge that his carefully orchestrated plans had crumbled. Miss Marple, however, did not enter the room with accusations. Instead, she spoke quietly to Inspector Halim. "Ensure that he is confronted with every detail: the letters, the tunnels, the observations from the bridge. The truth is often revealed more effectively when one must face the evidence rather than the accusation." Inside the room, Inspector Halim began methodically presenting the evidence. The letters discovered in the Erdem mansion were laid out, their connections and implications explained in careful detail. The torn fabric from the tunnels, the subtle traces of rose oil, and the footprints leading from the Ataturk bridge were examined. The map drawn on the wall of the underground passages was displayed, showing the network that had facilitated clandestine meetings and smuggling. Tuncer's hands trembled as he tried to deny involvement. But Miss Marple, standing quietly near the doorway, noted every reaction. The flicker of his eyes toward certain letters, the tightening of his jaw at specific maps, the barely perceptible hesitation when asked about the tunnels. Human nature, she reflected, seldom hides intent entirely. Finally, with quiet inevitability, Tuncer's composure shattered. His voice, trembling, admitted the truth. I never meant for it to go this far. Cemal Yildiz, he discovered too much. And when when the boy began asking questions, I panicked. I only wished to protect the family, to prevent scandal. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Mr. Tuncer, protecting family interests is understandable. Resorting to murder and intimidation is not. Fear often drives human behavior to extremes, but the consequences cannot be ignored. You underestimated the small details, the silent witnesses, and the persistence of those who observe. Outside the station, Istanbul bustled with its usual rhythm, unaware of the revelations that had just unfolded. Miss Marple and the Erdem family returned to the mansion, where the sunlight bathed the gardens and reflected off the Bosphorus. The city, with all its bridges and secrets, seemed to have regained a momentary peace. Layla, still shaken, asked softly, "Miss Marple, how did you know? How could you piece it together?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the serenity of the water below. "It is less about knowing than noticing. The human mind leaves traces, slips, gestures, misaligned objects, and the smallest inconsistencies. Observing carefully, listening to what is not said, and connecting subtle clues often reveals what is hidden in plain sight." Murat, now calmer, looked toward the Bosphorus. The bridges, the tunnels, and the letters, it all seemed so disconnected. Yet when you explained it, the pieces fit perfectly. Miss Marple nodded. Exactly. Chaos is often merely the perception of disorder. When viewed with attention and patience, patterns emerge. The first death, the attack, the hidden movements, they were all part of the same design. But even the most careful design leaves traces, and it is in these traces that truth resides. The day continued with the family beginning the slow process of healing and restoration. The mansion, once shadowed by fear and secrecy, now carried a sense of relief. Miss Marple observed quietly, noting how the tensions eased in small gestures. Layla's tentative smiles, Murat's unguarded laughter, and even Mr. Erdem's shoulders relaxing after days of stress. By evening, Miss Marple requested a private walk along the Bosphorus, alone with the soft murmur of the water beneath the bridges. The city's minarets glowed in the twilight, the ferries gliding silently, and the wind carried whispers of centuries of secrets. It was a city that had concealed much, but today it had revealed enough. As she walked, she reflected on the nature of human behavior. Greed, fear, ambition, and the desire to protect. These forces could drive men to extraordinary lengths. Yet, careful observation, patience, and understanding could untangle even the most convoluted schemes. Cemal Yildiz's death, Tuncer's desperation, and the small but telling traces left behind were all testament to this truth. Returning to the mansion, Miss Marple found the family gathered in the main hall. "Tonight," she said gently, "I hope you understand that justice does not always arrive swiftly, but it arrives nonetheless. The past week has tested patience, courage, and understanding. Let it also remind you of the importance of truth, observation, and the careful attention to those around you." Layla, her voice soft but sincere, said, "We are grateful, Miss Marple, not just for finding the truth, but for giving us clarity and the courage to face it." Murat, leaning against the window frame, added, "You have shown us that even in a city as vast and secretive as Istanbul, no deceit goes unnoticed forever." Miss Marple smiled, her gaze drifting toward the Bosphorus one last time. Indeed, the city itself bears witness to both folly and wisdom. Bridges connect, rivers flow, and shadows conceal, but careful attention and patience will reveal the truth hidden within the currents. Night descended over Istanbul, the city glittering under countless lights. The Erdem mansion, once a place of tension and fear, now carried an air of restoration. The bridges spanning the Bosphorus reflected the calm water, mirroring the clarity and balance restored within the household. Miss Marple retired to her room, quietly packing her belongings. Her visit to Istanbul, intended as a leisurely sojourn among historic sites, had transformed into a study of human nature, deception, and resolution. As she prepared to depart the following morning, she reflected that the city, with all its layers of history, culture, and complexity, had taught her much, but also reminded her that human nature remained an eternal enigma, ever intriguing and never entirely predictable. Before sleep claimed her, she penned a brief note to Mr. Erdem. The truth, though sometimes delayed, finds its way. Observe carefully, trust wisely, and remember that even in the grandest of cities, the smallest details often hold the greatest significance. The Bosphorus shimmered outside her window, bridges arching like silent witnesses to the past and present. Istanbul, with its secret tunnels, hidden alliances, and historic beauty, had surrendered its secrets for now. And Miss Marple, as ever, had listened carefully, understood deeply, and ensured that justice, quiet, deliberate, and inevitable, had been served.